Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Hello and welcome to the Actual Anarchy podcast, where we talk about movies from a Rothbardian, Anarcho-Capitalist perspective. Tonight we're going to be doing a documentary, so it's not actually technically a movie, or I guess documentaries are technically movies, so forget what I just said there. But this is episode 165 of the show, and you can find the show notes more at actualanarchy.com/165. We're going to have a great guest coming on when we get into the last night's portion of the show. But first I want to check in with Robert, because he just had some Snowmageddon stuff going on. It's been interacting with his ability to serve his fellow man as an entrepreneur. And he had to tunnel his way through to get to the recording space today. Thank you for making the effort, Robert.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, Daniel. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, you've been a multi-time guest now, 164 times. 163 prior to today. This is your 164th. We had one episode where you weren't able to make it. I forget even the reason why, but I think that was a Ratatouille one. So put that on our show notes page, because that was a fun talk without you.
I bet you it was. But I'm back by popular demand.
Yes, quite demanded. But we have a special guest coming up, and we should probably just get to it, because I want to respect his time. He only has a certain amount of time to be with us, and why don't we do that in the last night's portion of the show?
Let's do it.
Hey everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Johnson, The Last Nighters, and The Last Nighters can be found on Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. Check it out at thelaunchpadmedia.com. This is episode 108 of the show. We're talking about the documentary A Leaf of Faith, and you can find the show notes and more at lastnighters.com/108. Also, if you like what we do here, you can check out our Patreon page, where we have pre-show and post-show content. Post-show is called Kathleen Turner Overdrive, and if you guys are familiar with the movie High Fidelity, which we will be doing in a few weeks, you will get the reference, and if not, just wait a few weeks. Just wait longer, and you'll get the reference when we talk about it then. Anyway, we're going to have a special guest talking about A Leaf of Faith with us tonight. He is John Bush, and he has a company called Brave Botanicals. Is that correct, John?
Yep, Brave Botanicals, mybravebotanicals.com.
Excellent. And you are here to talk about Kratom, which is what A Leaf of Faith, this movie is by, is it Chris Hall? Or
Chris
Bell.
Chris Bell, he's a documentary filmmaker. This is, he did Bigger, Faster, Stronger a couple years ago, and then he did this one about Kratom and the efforts for the FDA to regulate and control, or even make it a Schedule 1, so like a felony offense to possess, consume, distribute, whatever. And the, I guess the backlash, or the popular pushback to prevent that from happening, is documented in this documentary. So it was a really good one. I enjoyed watching it, and I am glad that you brought it up, because I think we'll have a very fruitful discussion as a result. So why don't you introduce yourself just real quickly? Where can people find you? And I think you might have an offer. You could do it now or at the end for our audience.
Yeah, my name's John Bush. I've been an activist since 2002. Freedom and libertarianism, voluntarism is really important to me. Got into natural health along the way, and really started focusing on eating right, avoiding toxins, organic food, and natural remedies for ailments. And that really stuck with me. And the whole freedom thing became more of a holistic approach, not just political freedom, but freedom from chronic ailments, chronic fatigue. Also, spiritual freedom, not feeling stressed and having internal conflict and dealing with our internal tyrants, right? Everybody focuses on the external tyrants, but we have our own little internal tyrant that we see sometimes when we look in the mirror. So that all was really important to me. And along the way, I ran a bookstore in downtown Austin called Brave New Books, and we sold books, libertarian, conspiracy theory, all sorts of cool stuff. But the books didn't really sell very much, probably because of Amazon. We also sold natural health products, and that really kept things going. And one of those products was Kratom. And we started selling that, and I took it myself, really helped with stress and anxiety and energy and focus. And then what really was captivating for me as an activist, wanting to help people and make the world a better place, was to see how it just absolutely transformed people's lives and got them their lives back, got them to kick a opioid habit, or got them to be able to play with their kids again, and quit Adderall, all sorts of stuff. So I really leaned into that, and it's been very fulfilling work. And you mentioned an offer. We can talk about censorship and how the big social media and the government tries to shut Kratom down or make it harder to sell Kratom. So along the way, I decided, in order to get people to try it, I would just give it away for free. So people can go to freeounceofkratom.com, freeounceofkratom.com, and just pay $5 shipping and handling, and I'll send you a free ounce to try. So thanks, guys, for having me on. I'm impressed with y'all's little video stuff and how you do the flow of the podcast. Do good work, guys.
Oh, thank you very much. It's nice to hear that, and I appreciate you reaching out to be on the show. Now, you also sent me a link to your appearance on the Tom Woods show. What was that episode number? Is it 1416?
I don't remember.
Oh boy, I'm gonna have to find that on our show notes page, because I want people to be able to go and listen to that, because you and Tom get into a lot of the background on this, and I don't want to have to rehash too much of that because you have that one. So, if people want to know more, check that one out and listen to this one and watch the documentary and go to freeounceofkratom.com and try it out yourself as well. So anyway, we usually start off with the old Google description, just as a way to kind of kick things off. So we'll go to Robert for his reaction, then we'll get your take on what Robert usually has something pretty good to say. He's like my diving catch guy. So I come out here, I start flapping my gums, I don't even know what I'm saying, and he comes in and says something very coherent. Makes a good argument. So it's a good combo.
It's 50. I'm 50-50. We'll find out.
All right. So this is a film called A Leaf of Faith. Got 7.2 on IMDb. It was made in 2018. It's rated TV mature. It's an hour and 26 minutes as a documentary. This documentary takes a deep dive into the benefits, dangers, and lingering questions around kratom leaf as an alternative to opioid painkillers. It says it stars Shane Mouse and Joe Rogan. It's available on Netflix these days, and that's really all it says. So not a whole lot of information on the Google description, but I'll go to you, Robert, for your take and the opening information you have.
Well, that's not a lot to go off of. I'll say what I do know about that. This is a Chris Bell movie, and like you said before, he did Bigger, Stronger, Faster and Prescription Thugs, and I think he did one other film. But his movies have a bit of like homemade charm to them. He's always in each one. It's always him trying to like figure something out, or he has a perspective he wants to push. And he always narrates them. And he always has the absolute worst like animated graphics. It's like he makes them himself on like a computer with like an old version of Flash from the 90s or something, but it's always really horrible. Always kind of charming. I like him. But, I first saw Bigger, Stronger, Faster, which was he's like a chubby kid, and he always looked up to like wrestlers and bodybuilders, and he always wanted to be that strong guy. And he had these two other brothers, and it was all about his struggle to, gain mass. And then he was dealing with the aftermath after having I forget if he was taking anabolic steroids or not, but it was all about the health effects and that, and whether or not they were, had long-term detrimental effects. And he's still kind of on, he has this perspective on the world where he sees people doing something voluntarily and they enjoy it, but he doesn't see that as necessarily a good thing. Like, he'd rather introduce some kind of force and regulation into the mix, as if that's a good way to do it. And I guess a lot of statists have this perspective on things, and we'll probably get into that in this film, where people are enjoying this thing, but also some people are abusing this thing. So shouldn't the state come in and fix it, as if the state is capable of fixing things with force? So I like him. I like the way he's trying to figure things out, but I wouldn't like point to any one movie of his and say this is like the definitive take on any given thing. I think he asks interesting questions, but I wouldn't necessarily go to him for like philosophy or anything like that.
All right, yeah, that's interesting. In watching it, he seemed to be relatively neutral, maybe pushing a narrative a little bit more than the other, but yeah, he does have that homemade craft quality to it, where he's sort of just like asking questions and like trying to figure out, navigating along the way as he's like the audience is learning along with him. I kind of appreciate that. And then he interviewed that I'll call her that witch in Florida, that Democratic city council person who was like trying to push all this fear mongering and trying to, I guess, get it banned in the entire state of Florida. And just her takes were like the worst takes, But anyway, John, let's go to you and your response to Robert and the very limited Google information here.
Yeah, I enjoyed the documentary. Of course, I've been in the Kratom industry for 3 years, so it was especially exciting to see this really professionally put together piece. And like y'all said, I appreciate the approach. It's very consumable and it doesn't fly over people's heads. And Chris Bell does a good job narrating and kind of the innocent. I think he acts as though he'd never taken Kratom, and he takes it for the first time in the film, but I don't think that's the case. I think he's taken Kratom a lot, and that was just kind of a thing that they did to make the film more exciting. But he does approach it as though he's innocent and maybe a little naive on it, and he asks questions, which I think is a great, maybe like a Socratic way to explore a topic. And so I think in that regard, the documentary film with that angle is really good. It doesn't try to shove a bunch of information down your throat, although maybe it does in a subtle, indirect way, because obviously he has an agenda. But it's definitely a big topic to talk about, the whole libertarian angle. But before I get to that, I appreciate how he relays people's stories. So it's really effective storytelling to show people, not just to talk about it or talk about the science behind it, which there is a lot of science in the film, but he shows people's real world stories. And like there's a wrestler, for example, that was all addicted to Vicodin and cocaine and alcohol and started taking Kratom. And not only did the Kratom help with pain relief, but it also got him to kick all of the drinking and all of the cocaine as well. So I think that's cool. And I've met many of my customers and people in my personal life, like my partner, for example. She was taking Adderall for years on end since college, and she took it in her professional life, and it would lead her to drink pretty substantially when she would get off work, for example, because she was all wired. She said she would drink to pump the brakes. And so we started dating, and I saw the drinking and saw the Adderall and was like, hey, you should try some Kratom. So she tried some of our White Lightning Kratom and was able to quit the Adderall altogether and really get the drinking under control. So I thought that was pretty special. But there's other stories like that in the film. And then, of course, you guys are voluntarists, anarcho-capitalists. So there's a whole angle throughout the film, not just at one part, of trying to sell the idea that we need regulation in this space. So as a free market guy myself, I think the best regulation out there, because regulation just means to make regular, right? But most people know regulation is through bureaucracies and through government coercion. But I think the best regulation would be industry associations and personal responsibility on behalf of the consumer. And that does already take place. We all know that the reason why the government's trying to ban Kratom, it's illegal in 6 states. And in 2016, the FDA encouraged the DEA to add it to Schedule 1, which would have made it a federal felony. It's because it's big competition for big pharma. And it's estimated that the Kratom industry does like $5 billion a year. It may not be the most accurate term, but it's based on something. And then the prescription pain medicine industry is like 21 billion a year. Maybe it's gone up since I got that stat, but that's a pretty significant chunk of the money there. And so the corporations use the government in order to make it difficult for the competition to take foot. And that's exactly what's taking place. But one of the arguments that the regulators have, which there may be some truth to it, although I imagine it's a very small amount of truth, is that there's people that are adulterating and adding fentanyl and hydrocodone to Kratom And there's people that are pawning off other substances, and there's all sorts of salmonella and all sorts of stuff. There was like a small little salmonella outbreak, but there's salmonella in any industry. Like lettuce is constantly getting recalled. And so they're saying we need regulation in order to deal with this. And then all of these do-good Kratom vendors and advocates like Chris Bell and one of the Kratom vendors that they visit, they say, well, yeah, we need regulation. Let's regulate in order to make things better. So I think they're doing it as a fear-based reaction because they don't want the government to ban it. So they're like, we need to take care of it and we need to be an active participant. And that one vendor in the documentary is like worshiping the FDA. He's like, we should need to appreciate the FDA and they're doing a great job. They're just trying to help us. Yeah, right. And so that's something that bothered me. There's this Kratom Consumer Protection Act, which is being pushed by the American Kratom Association. And it's been passed in Utah and a couple other states. And it's been introduced in several states. And in fact, in 2020, they have plans to introduce it in 20 states, Texas being one of them. And so I think that the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, what it does is it regulates Kratom. It forces you to register with the government if you're a Kratom vendor. It requires testing on all the batches. And it one of the things that I really don't like about it, besides having to register with the government and just being part of the government altogether, is that you can't sell Kratom if it has more than a specific mitragynine. So there's mitragynine, which is one of the active alkaloids, and then there's 7-hydroxymitragynine. And the concentration of 7-hydroxymitragynine has to be under a certain percentage. So that means not only do you have to test it for purity and make sure that it doesn't have salmonella or heavy metals, but you also have to test the alkaloid content, which can be incredibly expensive. And then if you have stuff with a higher alkaloid content, you can't sell it. Like we just want to sell the whole plant here in its raw form. So that's problematic. But the thing is, in Texas, we don't have any issues with Kratom or people selling fentanyl laced Kratom. Like things are pretty smooth. I haven't really heard any stories in my own life or even happening in Texas. So I think the Kratom Consumer Protection Act may be a good thing when a state is saying we're going to ban Kratom, and it's like, hold on, we understand your concerns. And then they introduce the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. But when there's no problem at all and the government isn't trying to ban it, they probably don't even know about it. The state legislatures here in Texas, and there's no need to have the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And again, as an anarchist, I don't think there's a need to have it anyway, but it's definitely better than having it banned because Kratom is helping so many people. So that was a huge angle in the film that I'm sure irked you guys. It irked me as well. And it irks me as a Kratom vendor, the prospect of having to register with the state of Texas. No bueno.
Yeah, I totally agree with you as an anarchist. I'm like, no, but then the economic question is, well, compared to what? You know, compared to a full-on ban, of course it's better. And a similar compared to what is, you talked about people using this to get off opiates or Adderall or other things, like the wrestler was able to kick a lot of those habits. Even if Kratom does have any negative effects, well, compared to what he was doing before, it's a hell of a lot better than what, you know, he was coming from. So even if they discover the Kratom, you know, if you can abuse it and it does cause some problems, like compared to what they're doing now, isn't it an improvement?
Yep. Yeah, it's an example of harm reduction. And I should say, for people that want to try Kratom, again, then go to freeounceofkratom.com. If you take a lot of it and you take it every day, it can be habit forming, which is like my soft way of saying you can become dependent on it or even addicted to it. Now, like you said, it's an example of harm reduction. So I do have customers that buy a lot of Kratom every single month, like clockwork. And based on how much I sell them, I know that they're taking a whole lot. However, likely some of those customers were formerly addicted to hardcore opioids or even heroin, an opiate. And so even though they're now addicted to Kratom, and probably if they were to take so much and they were to quit, they would have withdrawal symptoms, likely not as severe as quitting heroin or Oxycontin or fentanyl, for example, but still like wet dog shakes, trouble sleeping, irritability, headaches. The Kratom, now the CDC and the FDA won't agree with this, but Kratom's not going to kill you from taking it alone. Maybe if you, I don't know, you could die from drinking too much water, but it's really hard to overdose on Kratom because your body makes you feel sick and like you vomit if you take too much. I've taken too much before and I had like flu-like symptoms the next day. This is back when I was experimenting with extracts. I'm not a big fan of the extracts anymore, but like you said, it's harm reduction. So it helps a lot of people. And then compared to what was going on before, it's night and day. So, and then again, when it comes to dependency or addiction, that's only if you're taking it substantially. Like I take it regularly almost every day, and I encourage people to take a few days off so their body doesn't develop such a tolerance they need to take more. And I don't generally experience withdrawal symptoms when I take time off. It does really help with tension and stress, and so I'm not as like laid back and just kind of chill when I'm not taking it on those days. But I've never experienced major withdrawal symptoms. That's not to say that you can't, but like you said, it's an example of harm reduction, and that's what's most important.
Yeah,
isn't that due to the much lower ceiling that Kratom has compared to these opioids? Right, it doesn't trigger is not as much in the dendrite or whatever in the
activity level or whatever. Action is what they.
Yeah, and you were mentioning the funny animations, which I appreciate also. There was one where this doctor talks about banging on a piano key. And so the opioids, the active alkaloids in Oxycontin or fentanyl, they're like banging on the key really hard, the opioid receptor. And then the Kratom one doesn't bang on it as hard. And it doesn't, I don't know all the technical terms, but it's not as addictive or dependent because precisely it doesn't bang on those opioid receptors. And there's different opioid receptors like the mu and the alpha and stuff, and they interact differently. And then one of the other big differences is Kratom doesn't cause respiratory depression, which is the main cause of death for people that overdose on opioids. And it's such a important topic now because we have this massive opioid epidemic. And the irony is that Kratom helps people to get off of opioids and opiates, yet lawmakers and regulators are saying that Kratom is a problem because people are taking it instead of heroin, like they said in the documentary. The guy was like, yeah, of course, the comedian's like, of course they're taking it instead of heroin. That's the idea here. So it's a plant whose time has come.
Yeah, it's interesting how the DEA seemed to not wonder why. Like the question, why are they taking it instead of heroin, didn't seem to enter their brains. It was just, hey, they're taking it instead of heroin, so it must be bad, as opposed to they're taking it because it's a good way to get off that stuff.
Yeah. That's a good point, Robert, because I could see them being like, well, that's the next drug in their thing, right? Like, oh, they're taking heroin and now they've got this Kratom. That could be worse. They're leveling up or whatever. But to your point and to John's point, it seems to be able to alleviate the dependency on opiates and help them get off of those harder things that have more negative effects.
Yeah, a lot of people go back. So people are like addicted to heroin or they're taking the pain pills and they want to quit and they know that it's affecting their lives. They're like all loopy. They can't play with their kids. Like we had a customer in California who is an older grandma and she was addicted to Percocet for years and she couldn't watch her 4 grandchildren and she would find herself like rocking on the bed, just all messed up. And people try to quit. And then the withdrawal symptoms are so strong and painful that they just take the pills again or the heroin again. And that's where Kratom really helps because you quit the opioids, you slowly wean yourself off and you start taking Kratom and it really acts to minimize those withdrawal symptoms. So that's really how it helps so many people in those areas. But it's not just, people that are addicted or dependent on opioids. I take it as an entrepreneur. It helps with mental focus. Like usually around 1 or 2 o'clock, I'll start getting a little brain fatigue. My brain will get a little cloudy. And I'll just have a couple teaspoons of Kratom in a big glass like this. This is water, but and it just helps to sharpen my focus and kind of give me a pep in my step. It also helps when my kids are going nuts. They're 6 and 8, and I'm like losing patience. I'll drink some Kratom, and it's just like, okay, I got this. I'm gonna go along with the crazy, and life's gonna be okay.
Yeah, mine are 4 and 6, and I definitely know the crazies.
Oh yeah. 2 years apart too is. I'm going to space that out a little more if I ever have more kids.
Yeah. So you mentioned the it's for people who want to get off opiates, but it's also to have more clarity and focus. It seems as if it's this miracle elixir that can do everything. So what is the take on that? I mean, is it really that effective in all these things, or is a lot of this a little bit of marketing speak? The miracle elixir kind of thing, and then who is it not for?
Okay, Yeah, so some people market it as a panacea. It interacts with not just the opioid receptors, and this is something I appreciated from Dr. Christopher McCurdy. He mentioned this in the documentary, and I didn't know this before when I watched the documentary a couple years ago, but it not only interacts and stimulates and binds to the opioid receptors, but also the dopamine and serotonin receptors. And that's why it helps with stress and anxiety, or with focus and just an overall sense of well-being. So some people, there's been a small amount of people that have taken it and they don't feel really much of anything at all. But for people that are stressed and anxious all the time, or for people that are in a lot of pain, it really does make a big difference. So I wouldn't say that it's marketing. I mean, it's a plant. It's like cannabis, right? Cannabis is this miracle plant that, if you believe in God, God gifted man this amazing thing, and man has endocannabinoid receptors, and the cannabis cannabinoids like CBD and THC interact with the endocannabinoid receptors. And if you don't believe in God, then, science and evolution helped. The plant was proliferated and grown because it was so beneficial to man, and maybe it became more potent, whatever. But Kratom is really similar. There's so many different uses for it. And it's such a game changer. And the side effects are so few and far between. So who shouldn't take it? If you're pregnant or nursing, you probably shouldn't take it. And I've had people reach out to me and ask that. And I know some vendors will like gloss over the negative effects and the negative side, which is it's very small compared to other stuff. But I'm always upfront and honest. So if someone is pregnant or nursing, they probably should avoid it, again, because they are opioids. And then there were some stories recently. You never know how much of it is propaganda, but I bet there's some truth to it, where babies were being born dependent on Kratom. And again, this is someone that's probably pounding Kratom. Now, I will say, and again, I'm not a doctor, right? So your audience is probably all anarchists and voluntarists, so they're not going to fault me for this. But I always like to throw out a little disclaimer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving you medical advice. It's all for educational purposes. But if someone is pregnant and they're taking Vicodin or Percocet or, God forbid, heroin, which happens, obviously it would be better to be taking Kratom than those things. But if someone's not taking that stuff and they're just feeling a little stressed, then maybe some meditation or change in lifestyle, yoga would be better than taking it. There are some drug interactions. Like there's some drugs that weigh heavy on the liver. And so one of the things that the FDA said was that Kratom causes liver damage. So when I read that, I went out and did as much research as I can to actually find instances of this. And I did find a study that says when someone is taking, again, it's taking a lot of Kratom. Like this is an ounce, for example. This is the free ounce that you would get, freeounceofkratom.com. It's 28 grams. If you take just a moderate amount, it'll last like 2 weeks. There's people that take this much a day. And again, that's something that should last for around 2 weeks or so. And so if you're taking this much a day and you're taking it all the time, it could weigh pretty heavy on the liver. The alkaloids, mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine, like you do have an effect, right? It's subtle if you take a small amount, but it does affect your body, and your liver and kidneys have to filter all that out. So there's certain medications to be aware of. But again, Kratom's a member of the coffee family. And when you take it in small to moderate amounts, it's relatively benign. So I always encourage people, this is what I do. I get this full of water. I mix 2 good-sized teaspoons. I always encourage people to start with a 1/4 teaspoon or 1/2 teaspoon, a really small amount. And then you mix it with a thing of water like this, and you just drink it slowly. So some people do a toss and wash, where you take a dose and you toss it in your mouth and you take water and swish it around. Or some people take a bunch of capsules. We also sell it as capsules. But then you have the full effect, right? But if you sip on it, then you could drink a little bit and then wait like 5 or 10 minutes. And okay, I think I feel a little calmer, my pain's kind of going away. You drink a little bit more, and that way you can kind of ease into it in case it doesn't sit well with you. Because there have been some people that have like gotten nausea and stuff. But if anybody's truly concerned and they're taking medications, then the best thing to do is consult your physician. But the cool thing about plant medicine, and another thing real quick, in the documentary, that ibogaine lady, ibogaine is like a plant medicine that a lot of people use to help get through addiction and depression and stuff. Some people put it in the same camp as ayahuasca, although I don't think it's as hallucinogenic. The lady, so Chris Bell goes to visit this woman that's trying to legalize and decriminalize ibogaine. He's like, well, what about Kratom? And surprisingly, this lady that's trying to decriminalize and deschedule ibogaine is like, oh, well, I think that should be regulated, or that should actually be Schedule 1. And if people are going to take it, they're going to need to take it with the doctors. And as libertarians and anarchists, we know that there's this dependence on authority, whether it's needing a permit to add an addition to your house, or I only believe something if a professor says it, or economics, right? It's a Keynesian theory, and there's this economist in the Wall Street Journal that said blah, blah, blah about the Federal Reserve or whatever. There's this dependence on authority, and that comes up in the medical realm as well, where people won't act unless their doctor prescribes it. Like Chris Bell's mom, his whole family takes Kratom and benefits from it, except his mom won't try it. And then he's like, well, you'd try it if a doctor prescribed it, wouldn't you? And she's like, oh, yeah. So the cool thing about Kratom and other plant medicines, like cannabis, for example, is it gives us authority over our own bodies, and it allows us to experiment and to relieve ourselves through our own authority and being in touch with our own body and that connection to the plant medicine, which I think is really important.
Real quick, this is totally off topic, but kind of sort of not. If you're only interested in the pain relieving aspects of Kratom, and you were to get like that 1 ounce pouch, you don't add like preservatives or anything to it. So what's the shelf life? Like if I only wanted to take it when I'm hurting, but I only hurt like a couple times a year, is that going to last, or is it going to go bad?
Yeah, a couple things on that real quick. There's different varieties. So this is the green that you get for the free ounce, and it's the most versatile. In smaller amounts, it can be a little stimulating, kind of uplifting, good for stress and anxiety. In larger amounts, it has a little bit more of a sedative effect and can affect your body more, so it would be better for the pain. So that's green. There's also another green called Super Green Dragon, which is my personal favorite. It's good for stress and anxiety. It doesn't have the euphoria that the green Mang Da has. It's not as strong as the green Mang Da, so I like it because I'm more active in the day and I take it for help with work and stuff. And then there's a white variety, which is the most uplifting and energetic. Some people take instead of coffee. This one's good for stress and anxiety and focus, and as an entrepreneur or doing research or studying or whatever. And then there's the red ones, Red Relaxation and OG Bali. These are the best ones for pain, the red variety. So there's green, white, and red. The red tends to be the most sedative. The white tends to be the least sedative. The green tends to be in the middle. And these help for pain more and have more of a relaxing effect. They're a little more sedative. A lot of people take the Red Relaxation for pain. But to answer your question, we import it from Indonesia. It's just in its raw plant form, and it lasts quite a long time. So we always sell fresh Kratom, like we cycle through it in less than 2 or 3 months. But I have Kratom that's from my own stash or stuff that I didn't sell back in the day that's like 2 years old. It might lose a little bit of its potency, but in fact, there was another, I called it my little private reserve stash that was as strong as ever, and it was like 3 or 4 years old. I picked it up. Somebody sold it to me 2 years later. Like my friend held on to it when when we thought the DEA was going to ban it. It ended up being some of the best Kratom I ever had. But if you keep it in a cool, dry place, some people put it in the freezer or the fridge, it should last for quite some time. And so you can have it as needed basis.
And these strains you have, these different varieties, you're mixing them yourself with different leaves, or are these different trees?
Yeah, so it's not as scientific or specific as cannabis strains, right? Where they cultivate the seed and they're very careful to keep track of it and not cross-pollinate, so to speak. And strain is a misnomer. That's why I also say varieties. And so the color comes from the darkness or the color of the leaves of the tree. Kratom is made from the powderized, dried up leaves of the Kratom evergreen tree, and the little veins that transport the water and the nutrients. The redder the vein, that'll be the red Kratom. The lighter the vein, that'll be the white ones. There's also stuff they do in the drying process. And so we've had the same farmer for like 2 to 3 years now. And basically it's like this patch of trees in the farm constantly puts out this darker red, right? So we're going to call that our red Mang Da. I came up with Red Relaxation. What I buy it as is red Mang Da. The green Mang Da is a green Mang Da. White Lightning is a white Mang Da. And then OG Bali is a red Bali, and the super green's a super green. That's what I buy it as. So I think it's just like these trees And then of course they drop the seeds and they're sprouting new ones, or they're cultivating it and planting them. These trees tend to have this darker red leaf. They tend to have this more sedative body effect. These trees over here tend to have the whiter, lighter leaves. And then these tend to be a little more stimulated and energetic. So it's not as scientific as cannabis, but hope that answered your question.
Sure.
Well, I'm not mixing anything. It's all, some people do their own blends and stuff. I just sell it like 5 straight varieties. It's exactly what I receive from Indonesia, and then we repackage it and sell it in smaller amounts.
But you definitely, from one variety to the next, you can definitely tell the difference, is what I'm basically asking.
Yes, even the 2 greens, like the green Mang Da, I just got a new batch, and I wanted to try it because I don't normally take it. And sure enough, it has the same similar effect. It feels great for me for an hour or two, and then it's a little bit strong, and I start to feel a little too relaxed, which some people may be going for if they're doing it for stress and anxiety or pain. But I'm looking for that choppy, sharp, like go, go, go. And just between the super green dragon and the green Mang Da, I could tell the green Mang Da is consistently more euphoric. I should say too, when people do the free ounce offer, freeounceofkratom.com, you go to add cart, and then once you click add cart, you're presented with a one-time offer to buy the 4 other strains for 50% off. So out the door, you can get all 5 of our offerings for $33.75. And that way you can try which one fits for you. Maybe this one's a little too strong. Maybe this one's just perfect. Maybe these 2 are really good. And then if it does benefit you, you can come back and maybe buy 4 ounces so you can get a better price per ounce buying it in bulk. We also sell half kilos, which lasts a good long while for some people. You save a lot of money that way.
So that kind of leads me into my next question. Washington State recently, I guess in the past few years, legalized cannabis. But in doing so, they put this ridiculous tax on it. So they tax the growers 49%, and then they tax the sellers another 32% or something like that. So it's like 81% tax or 79% tax or something like that, the actual consumer cost. So the price is super artificially inflated. But what's it like buying Kratom these days? Is the state getting their grubby mitts all over it, or are you just collecting normal state sales tax?
No, well, in the great state of Texas, which is very friendly to business, relatively so, right? They don't tax supplements and food. So on the one hand, some Kratom vendors will say not for human consumption because they want to avoid the FDA doesn't allow Kratom to be sold as a dietary supplement. You're not supposed to make any claims. So I always try not to make any of the cure, treat any disease claims, right? Although, I'm sure as hell talking about taking it to help you. But I guess that's a risk that I take. I also put a suggested serving size on the label. So it's a moral hazard. I didn't always have the suggested serving size on the label because I just wanted it to be like, well, someone could be taking it as foot powder or they make soap with it, right? But then I thought, wow, if I don't have a suggested serving size, someone could go in and take like 2 tablespoons to start off with, and they could feel really nauseous and feel ill. So maybe I'm putting myself at a little bit of risk because I talk about openly, and on my website, it talks about helping with pain. But at the end of the day, like I thought the right thing to do, even though it may not be approved by the FDA or the government, the right thing to do is to let people know how much they should take. So to answer your question, in Texas, there's no taxes at all. So I don't have to collect sales tax. I have a sales tax and use permit as a business owner, but I every quarter I put a big 0 as far as the taxable revenue, which is great. In some states, I imagine they collect sales tax. The Kratom Consumer Protection Act, right? Love it or hate it, it doesn't have anything about taxing it. So maybe if it grows in popularity, as it becomes legitimized with the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, right? So it's this love-hate thing. People are going to be like, oh, well, it's regulated now. I know that every single batch is tested. I know that the government approves it now. So maybe it's going to become more mainstream. I imagine as it becomes a bigger, more mainstream industry like cannabis, everybody's smoking cannabis, right? The government will probably want to get their grubby hands on it. But for now, even the states that pass the Consumer Protection Act, it doesn't have a taxation thing. You just have to pay a registration fee to the government, maybe an annual registration fee. I don't know what it is, a couple $100. But it's largely unregulated. In the states that it's not banned, in the states that it's not the Kratom Consumer Protection Act hasn't passed, it's just total Wild West, which as a voluntarist is how I prefer it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that reminds me of the movie, and I suppose we should talk about the movie a little bit. Where it was really one of the more infuriating interviews was where Chris was talking to this, I want to say he was a doctor, and he was very anti-Kratom, and he was concerned about what you were taking it for, and like how you were going to classify it. What you were taking it for is how you're going to classify it. And he's like, if it treats any kind of condition, and forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, he says, if it treats any condition, then it's a drug. And I was like, that's a horrific definition, because anything's a condition. So food treats hunger, clothes treat feeling cold. I mean, anything is a condition. So the whole classification of what's a drug and what's not is so arbitrary and idiotic. And it just gives people an excuse to say, well, this is bad and this is arbitrarily bad. We're going to shut this down. When, like you said before, it's really just because it's cutting in on pharma's big profits. So
yeah,
that was
the guy you're talking about. He was a representative or the president of the national, I think it's a natural products industry, or the natural products industry, or it's basically a lobbying firm for dietary supplements. And he has spoken out against Kratom. And what I think that is an example of slave-on-slave violence, right? So back in the day, I did a lot of traffic activism where I didn't renew my driver's license and my registration expired, and I'd go to court and I'd fight it and say, which is a true legal interpretation, but it's not going to fly for the judge or the jury, as I would find out, that if you're not engaged in commerce, which is transporting goods or persons for a profit, right? Like these big commercial 18-wheelers, or even a commercial flight is transporting people for profit, then you're not required. The commercial code doesn't apply to you, right? You're just traveling freely. There's even Supreme Court rulings and all sorts of bogus stuff. But you bring that up in court, and the jury is still going to convict you because the jury's like, well, I have to have a driver's license, so do they, right? It's slave-on-slave violence. So just the same, this natural products industry goon is like, well, my industry is regulated as dietary supplements, and we have to do all this stuff and pay for these licenses and do all this extra stuff. So I'm not going to let these Kratom guys fly under the radar and not have to do that. So that's what the story is with that jerk. And what he's talking about is, it's not, so hunger isn't a disease, right? Chronic pain could be considered a disease. Well, according to the FDA and the government and stuff. And so when you start talking in terms of relieving pain, so I never say like a straight disease, but the FDA has this catch-all, which is why when you make claims, you're supposed to really say nothing at all. Maybe it helps with a sense of well-being, because pain, while pain isn't a disease, pain is a symptom of a whole wide variety of diseases. And so even symptoms, if you make a claim about a symptom, it can be coupled in as a disease, and it's just all convoluted. And something the government does, like they interpret it in a way that benefits them. So that's what he was talking about there. If you're talking about, I take Kratom as for a sense of well-being, then it wouldn't be considered a quote-unquote drug. But if like I take Kratom for chronic pain, and he's like, oh, well, that's a medical condition, and that means it needs to be a dietary supplement, but Kratom's not approved as a dietary supplement. I did this report where I talked about this great libertarian thing where it's the way that things are supposed to operate in America. And this is bullshit, actually. It's never was supposed to operate this way. Government is supposed to operate as it does, which is like the ruling class controls everyone else and maintains their position of power and leeches off of everyone. But, to talk in peachy terms, the way things were supposed to operate was a giant sea of rights with an island of privileges. So you have the right to do all sorts of stuff, and it's only a privilege if it's something that interferes with someone else's property or someone else's rights. And these are the things that you have to ask permission from the government to do. But other than that, it's assumed that it's a right. But along the way, that was actually flipped and reversed. So now you have a giant island of a giant sea of privileges with a tiny island of rights. So unless the way that the government does it now when it comes to food and dietary supplements and stuff is unless the government has expressly approved it, it's assumed to be prohibited. But the way that it should be is unless the government expressly prohibited it, then it should be fair game, right? And so because the government hasn't expressly approved Kratom, as a dietary supplement, then it shouldn't be sold as a dietary supplement. But at the same time, it's not banned. There's not a law saying you can't take it as a dietary or something that helps you medically, you know? So it puts Kratom vendors in this really tough spot. And like I said before, early on, I was like, well, I'm not going to put a suggested serving size. I'm not going to talk about how it helps people with these medical issues. I'm just selling it as a powder, and people can do with it what they please. But I decided, like, you know what? Whatever. First Amendment, I'm just sharing information, educating people, and I'll just understand the risks. If the FDA wants to send me a letter, I guess I'll shift my business practices. But for now, I'm just trying to help as many people as possible.
Very good.
All right. Well, while you guys were talking, and John, you are quite eloquent, and you go on for quite a while. So while you're talking, I have all these like things I want to interject with, but I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh, sorry.
And now they're all gone. So
Oh no,
it's okay. You've given us tons of great stuff already.
I'm a ranter.
No, that's okay. I often get into little rants as well, and that's a good thing. While you guys were talking about the different varieties, I kept thinking of that scene in Pulp Fiction with Lance, and like, this is Panda, this is Chobo, this is Madman. And I know it's like, not an illicit thing like heroin, but it just kind of reminded me of that. So, we tie it to movies. But another frame of reference that Robert and I are both, if Robert remembers this book, are familiar with is a thing called Betel Nut. Do you remember this book, Robert? A Rumor of War. I had to read it in college, and I think I gave it to you to read as well. It was about the Vietnam War and how, like, if you weren't directly fighting, then you could interact with the people, and it wasn't a negative situation. But anyway, he was talking about the people who were chewing on these leaves of the betel nut tree, and it would turn their mouths red, but it would have a mild hallucinogenic effect. And it seems somewhat similar to what we're finding here with Kratom. And, it's a natural occurring thing that people have been using for hundreds of years in Indonesia. And by the way, last week we were just talking about a movie called Gold, which was partly based in Indonesia as well. So for whatever reason, we're on a Southeast Asia kick right now. But I guess this goes back to another question for you, John. Did Kratom just come along too recently to the West? Because if it has similar effects to, say, cannabis has all these positive effects for people, and then the government stepped in and was like, well, it's competing with, something else, the hemp industry, we're going to just ban it and outlaw it and criminalize it and demonize it, right? But what of things that came before? What of aspirin or Tylenol or laudanum, which is basically heroin, or cocaine being in things like, if these things had come along, if Kratom had been around for 100 or 200 years in the U.S., would it be a regulated thing? Would it just be a normal thing that people just have, like vitamin C
or coffee?
Yeah. So it's been used for hundreds of years in Southeast Asia, and interestingly enough, it was used by the indigenous peoples in that area for the same stuff that it's popular in the West now. People would use it as a stimulant to help get through their laborious days in the farm or the field. They would use it to help take the edge off, sitting around the fire, brewing it in a tea and drinking the tea with their friends. Much like in the West, we sit around and drink beer after a hard day's work. And then interestingly enough, it would also be used to help overcome opium addiction. So opium's been, popular for hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's where heroin comes from, right? The poppy plant. And the opium, people would become dependent and addicted, and there'd be opium crises, much like we have now, opium epidemics, and people would use Kratom to come off of that. And then in the 90s, it started being imported to the States, probably through head shops and stuff. I don't know exactly what the purpose of the import was, but it was very, very obscure. And I believe that it started exploding in popularity. It coincided with the opioid epidemic, opioid crisis, which has been going on for 20 years, but really started picking up steam in the past decade or so. And of course, that's because the pharmaceutical companies pushing it on the doctors and making people think it's all safe. But I'm reading a book about opioid addiction and how to overcome it. And apparently like 20 to 25% of people that take opioids end up becoming hardcore addicted to it. But I think it started exploding in popularity coinciding with the opioid epidemic. And then in 2016, when the government tried to ban it, I think Robert said early at the beginning, it just exploded in huge popularity because now the press was talking about it. People started Googling it. If you look at Google search, which I've done, you can see the huge spike in 2016 when the government tried to ban it. So I imagine had it been around already for 50 or 100 years, it would be regulated. And I think that like cannabis is a naturally occurring thing, right? So it's not something that you can patent, which is why why the big pharmaceutical companies are all up in arms about it. And even the doctor from the film, Christopher McCurdy, he wants to patent the alkaloids in Kratom and make a medicine out of it, which is something that he wants to do. But his assistant said they can still exist peacefully together, but who knows? So I imagine fast forward 10 to 20 years from now, Kratom's going to continue to grow in popularity. It'll probably be regulated like cannabis is, and they'll probably have synthesized it again, because the big benefit of Kratom over the traditional opioids is that it doesn't cause respiratory depression. So it does have so many amazing benefits, and it could really replace a lot of these poppy-based opioids that cause respiratory depression and are the reason why so many people are dying in this country right now.
Yeah, what you just said was all excellent, but I wanted to just reiterate like one of the most frustrating point for me in this film, and I understand the desire of people doing this to seem like legitimate. I guess when your product is regulated and whatever, you feel like you're one of the adults in the room, I suppose. But it's like they're out there, they're serving their fellow man, they're creating this product, and people are buying it voluntarily and they're enjoying it, and it's helping them. But then they're like, but we need to get the government involved because otherwise they might come in, or we need to like self-regulate. We need to see, like, they wanted to force everybody to get it tested. Like, they see the value in presenting a tested product to their customers, because that's, a valuable thing for a consumer to see, like, well, here's this product X that I'm not exactly sure what's in it, and here's product Y, and product Y has all these like certifications and whatever. That is appealing to a customer, right? And they see that, and they're like, well, we need to have someone come in and force it to do it. But then they end up at the end, they're just like, well, let's just do it ourselves. They're like, they go to a guy and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna bankroll this testing for this thing, and then like Chris Bell's gonna get into this business. So it's like they see the value in it, so then they just do it themselves. But then they probably still want it regulated. It was really frustrating. It reminded me of the Comics Code and the Motion Picture Rating Agency back in the day, when government was going, well, what are all these racy movies coming out of Hollywood? And what are these racy comic books being made? These are corrupting our youth, and they're corrupting everybody. You guys need to like get a handle on this stuff. And so the industry sort of self-regulated themselves. Like you can't do X, Y, and Z. And it really put a hamper on creativity. And you ended up with just stupid shit. I want these people to learn the lesson and to just go straight free market, and let the market and the consumers trust the consumers to go, well, yeah, this product is probably going to be better than this product. Or, maybe there'll be some people that will rather pay a lower price and roll the dice on this other Kratom. I don't know. But there's probably going to be a large enough market on the tested Kratom for other people. I don't know. Just let the market decide. I wish people would see that.
Yeah. We're such a minority as libertarians and anarchists that something like that bothers us. But I didn't like the vendor that they spoke with at the end. And I think he was kind of arrogant. And obviously he's scaled to a position of where they can test every single batch that comes in. Our Kratom is tested periodically. We don't test every single batch that comes in. But like I said, we have the same supplier for over 2 years now, and we've never had any issues with adulteration or salmonella or anything. And every time our periodic tests come through, it's totally pure and clean. And, you got to scale, right? So you start somewhere and then you build up and you you improve your practices. And the guy was speaking from a position where they're already in a scaled position, and they're doing, I don't know what they like push through 20,000 kilos or something a month, which is nuts. Way more volume than I'm doing, and they have way more money revenue than I'm doing. And you got to build up to something. And most of all my customers and the people that I do business with are comfortable with our practices, and they know that I take the Kratom myself, right? So that's a test in itself, where it's like I'll be the guinea pig before putting it out to my customers. But the periodic tests are sufficient. The fact that we have the same trusted, reputable supplier is sufficient. And like you said, the market can regulate itself, and that's already slowly taking place. Like the American Kratom Association has general good manufacturing practices, and there's certain vendors that are getting certified under that banner. And so it's kind of like the non-GMO project, right? Like a lot of libertarians were like, we need to have regulation that requires labeling of GMOs. I was always like, well, there's already nonprofits and businesses that are doing that. And like the non-GMO project is an example. So we don't need the government to do that. We can do it on our own, and there can be industry associations, and there's value in that in and of itself, but not everyone sees it that way, unfortunately. And we're the obscure libertarians that are making an issue out of it. A lot of people are comfortable with the government when they should really understand that it's a big fraud, and it exists to benefit the big corporations and big companies at the expense of the competition.
Yeah, and a lot of times they want standards to be all or nothing, right? Everyone must play by the exact same standards no matter what, and that's like a protectionary measure for the entrenched interests. You see this all the time with regulatory capture. Public choice economics tells us that if it's going to be a distributed, small, minor cost among many people, but concentrated benefits, then you're going to have this, what do you call it, like a disparate amount of power or influence or effort into changing something. And so you see this because government exists and is there to be captured, that's why these things can become such terrible situations. And just to like highlight some of the further study on this regarding consumer protection, Bob Murphy is great on this. Robert P. Murphy. I've got a lecture about consumer protection I'll put up on our show notes page. I've also got things from Mark Thornton about drugs and whether they should be legal or not from an economics standpoint. So I'll put something like from that up. Also, Robert Higgs in his book, Crisis and Leviathan, or it could be Against Leviathan. He talks about how the FDA, in just a decade, there were over 500,000 deaths related to prescription drugs that were prescribed by doctors already approved by the FDA, not even mentioning the untold horrors of people suffering from disease who can't get cures or relief because the FDA won't approve the drugs, or it's like in the movie you talked about, it's $1 billion to bring a new drug to market just to get the FDA processing. So, how much suffering is related to even that, things being prevented from people making choices for their own bodies, like the left likes to talk about my body, my choice, but only in one very, very narrow and particular topic, not about virtually anything else. And then Tom DiLorenzo, he's also really good about the cronyism and protectionism. So I'm going to post a bunch of stuff on our show notes page at lastnarrative.com/108 related to that. We are going to need to start to wind down. Our show is just about an hour. So if you guys have any final notes before we get into final summary and review and give a rating on this documentary 1 through 10.
Well, one thing that I really appreciated about the film was they talk about addiction quite a bit. And they talk about how anything can be addictive. I think they mentioned sugar, fat, and salt being about as addictive as Kratom. And that's absolutely, I've never taken Kratom. And I'm sure you take it because you like it. It feels good, makes you feel good. It gives you a certain whatever you're looking for. But so does anything else. So, people they made the distinction between hiding. I want to say it was like hiding from the world, like escaping. I think that was the word they used, or somebody was using, was whether you take it to escape from things or you to take it to enhance your current life. And you could say that, a lot of people escape from life with food, like sugar, fat, salt. or video games, or, I mean, it could be literally anything. But whether you, I mean, like, I'm reminded of, and this is like secondhand information, but they were like taking studies with mice, and they would like give them the option of having food or heroin, and they would just, and it was like a mouse all by itself in this cage, and it was just like heroin, death. But they put it in like that exact same choice with like a healthy mouse in a group setting, like with a happy mouse, and they got like a whole community support and that sort of thing. And it was like, yeah, I'll take some heroin every once in a while, but I don't like abuse it. It really shows how pretty much anything can be used harmfully, but other things can also be used to enhance things. So the idea that you're arbitrarily going to distinguish one thing as like Schedule 1 and then another thing, it's just, it really shows the political and financial backing of the bullshit that the DEA is. And for that, I really think this is a great film.
Yeah, it's ironic. It's totally arbitrary and subjective. And to have human beings and who's ever in power get to make the decisions. And of course, we know the people that are in positions of power in the FDA are former executives in pharmaceutical companies. And even this guy, Scott Gottlieb, who was the FDA director most recently, Trump appointed him. He resigned since, but he was not only a former pharmaceutical executive, but he was like on the board of these pharmaceutical investment conglomerates, just making millions and millions of dollars off of all this. And then, as one of y'all pointed out earlier, the ultimate irony is that so many more people are dying from opioids and fentanyl and stuff that is FDA approved and is prescribed by a doctor compared to Kratom, which is like nobody dying. And they say there's like 91 Kratom related deaths. That was a CDC number. And then it turns out that all but 7 of those had other stuff in their system, like heroin and fentanyl. And then some of those 7, like one person was shot. And again, it's highly unlikely that people are dying by taking Kratom alone. But what's really unsafe is the stuff that is approved and the stuff that is regulated. So it's all arbitrary. And I wish more people, I think more and more, I feel optimistic about the prospects for liberty in the future because, especially because of the internet. And like we saw with Edward Snowden and the whole Big Brother thing, that used to be like a weird conspiracy theory that the computer's watching you and your phone's listening to you and they're tracking all your emails and stuff. And now it's truth and everyone knows that. I think more and more people are starting to see through the veil of legitimacy that the state has as they continue to just do so many horrible things, both Republicans and Democrats. And I'm hoping that more and more people will see the light of day and see through this FDA stuff. And I know that the cool thing about Kratom, and again, as I talked about earlier, like the masses don't ever change history. So Kratom isn't a remedy for the masses to take. It's a remedy for people that are fed up with what their doctor's prescribing not working. It's a remedy for people that don't believe the CDC press release. It's a remedy that for people that don't get their news from CNN. It's for people that think outside the box. And that gives me hope. And so it's just a matter of time, I think, before more and more people see the light. And if they don't, then, you know, we can just do our own little thing in our own little communities and we can help each other out and the masses can just watch TV all day and vote. But if people want to try Kratom again, you can go to freeounceofkratom.com and you'll get one of these right here. Normally it retails for $15, but you'll get it for free. All you have to do is pay $5 shipping and handling, and you can try this. And then you're presented with an opportunity to get our 4 other strains for 50% off. So for $33.75, you can try all 4, and maybe one of them suits your fancy, helps you with stress, anxiety, focus, pain, relaxation. Maybe you drink a little bit too much and you want to cut back from that. Helps with all sorts of stuff. I especially like it that it's, you know, throwing a little uppercut punch to the pharmaceutical companies because so many people are using it and getting off of prescriptions from whether it's depression meds, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, anti-anxiety stuff, Adderall, opioids. Helps a lot of people.
Yeah, and your numbers that you were giving us earlier, the 5 billion versus 21 billion. I mean, that's a huge chunk. I'd be curious to see where that number comes from, because I would think that the prescription drug market would be bigger than 21 billion, and that the Kratom one, if it's 5 billion, that's huge for something that I hadn't heard of until just recent events. So anyway, yeah. I'd love to see that and post it on our show notes page at lastnerd.com/108. But why don't we kick off our final summary and review? We'll start with Robert, and then we'll go to you, John.
Okay. So this is another Chris Bell production, which I think I like the guy. I appreciate his viewpoint. He said some things that I would disagree with, of course, like anybody. Probably the biggest thing he said that I was like, what? That I just, people don't understand this when they say things like this. But he said, being free from pain is a basic human right. And I'm like, it's just not true. I don't know what world he lives in, but it's not a right to be pain-free. I still like the guy, of course. He's fantastic. And this is probably his most important film. So if you're going to see any of his stuff, see this one. His other films have been, I mean, I don't know about Prescription Thugs. I haven't seen that one, but I imagine that I already know a lot of the information that he's going to be talking about in that film. But anyway, this one for sure. I like that he presents both sides. Clearly he has an agenda and a viewpoint, but he does present arguments. I mean, I don't even know if they're arguments, though. He interviews people, and they're basically just, I don't like this thing, so I want it banned. They don't seem to really have an argument. They point to a few deaths that, like we said, are mixed with other drugs and that sort of thing, but they're blaming this thing because it's new and scary, I guess. What people don't understand, they're afraid of.
Or it's just somebody died and they happen to have Kratom in their system. Like,
yeah.
Right.
Hit by a bus.
Yeah, he's hit by a bus, but he had it in him, so it killed him. Check it out for sure. I think this is a good documentary. I'd say it's probably like an 8. I'm a documentary fan. So yeah, and it's good for sure. Check it out.
All right, very good. John, your final summary and a score out of 10, please.
I'm a big documentary guy as well. Early on with 9/11 Truth documentaries, that's how I got my start in the documentary film world. But I appreciate his approach. I appreciate how consumable it is, and it's relatively objective. And I just like the kind of follow the naive guy along as he learns about Kratom and educates you as well. I think he had a nice broad interviewees that he talked to. I especially appreciate how he gave the opposition a fair shake. The council member, the mayor lady from Florida, she got an opportunity to share her piece, even though it was total bogus. So I think as far as information, and it is entertaining too, and it's kind of a little chipper in certain parts. And because I'm a big Kratom guy, right, I would give it, a 9 or a 10. But I'm going to take away 2 points because the whole regulation angle wasn't just like a passing thing. I think he really drove home the regulation. Like that was one of his points, not only to educate people about Kratom and to expose people to Kratom, but at the end of the day, he had an agenda to encourage Kratom to be regulated. And I find that to be morally reprehensible. So I'm going to take away.
That's well said.
I'm going to take away 2 points on that, and I'll give it an 8.
All right. 2-point deduction. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I enjoyed the documentary as well. I watched it with my wife, and we liked it. Chris seemed to be a very good, filmmaker. It's a little bit like home cooking style. Like he's in it, and he's like very curious, and he's talking to people, and he seems pretty open with it. I mean, you can kind of see a little bit of an agenda. He's sort of pushing the pro-Kratom side just a little bit, but at least he does give the shakes to the other side. That lady, it was interesting because during her last, I guess, city council thing, even the guy was like, this is your last one that you're doing, and I want to be able to vote for you, but I can't. And that just showed me also an insight into how politics works. Like, well, he's going to vote for her a little bit more than he otherwise might have because it was her last thing, like for some sentimental, pap. Just highlights how ridiculous politics can be. But on the other side of it, because of social media and new media, podcasts, Joe Rogan, the word got out that the FDA was going to do something to impact the people who are using Kratom, and they were able to push back on that. So I think that was also a big portion of the story that maybe we could have talked about a bit more on this, but I definitely recommend checking inside because you can kind of see how, as an anarchist, I don't want to partake in the political arena, but there are people who do, and Ron Paul was one who was using it as an educational platform. There's the LPMC, the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus. They're trying to get it back to like principled arguments and things like that. And so I think that there is a space for that, because sometimes the government only listens to one type of thing, and that's like whether their jobs are at risk for getting voted out. I mean, it's a very minor thing that you can do, pushing back on it, but at least it's something, and why not use every voice available? So for that, I'm actually going to give it a bonus point back from where I would have given this a score of 7. I'm going to go up to an 8 on this one. So one takes away, the other gives.
Three-way tie.
Three-way tie.
All right.
All right, so this is a Leaf of Faith. This is episode 108. We all gave it A's. Check it out on Netflix. Next week, we're going to live, die, and repeat for Groundhog Day. As we're going to invite back Jack V. Lloyd of the Voluntaryist comic book series to talk about The Edge of Tomorrow, starring Tom Cruise. It's going to be a blockbuster for that one. And we did Groundhog Day a couple of years ago, and this is, he goes through the same day again and again, just like Bill Murray does in The Great Groundhog Day. So I thought it was relevant to do that for the Tom Cruise film. So we'll be doing that next week. John, your company is Brave Botanicals, and people can find that at what's the link again? And then one last time on the it's like an infomercial here. Where can people get their free Kratom?
Yeah, the company's Brave Botanicals, and the website is mybravebotanicals.com. We also sell CBD oil, and we just started selling CBD flower, which is very nice and has no THC, so it's super, super chill and super smooth. And then if someone wants to try an ounce of Kratom, they can go to freeounceofkratom.com. That's freeounceofkratom.com.
People are standing by.
Hey, that CBD oil, I've had that. It's fantastic. But it's super taxed here in the state, in Washington. So is that also like Kratom, not taxed down there?
Not taxed in Texas. And so, I mean, if you buy it from another state, we're not adding taxes any way around it. So give it a try.
Cool.
All right, very good. There was something else I was going to say here. Oh, yes, all the ways you guys can support the show. Robert's usually pretty good about this, but I'll just throw one thing out there. Check out our Patreon, lastnighters.com/Patreon. We got 2 new patrons in the last week.
Welcome.
So welcome new patrons. We'll be giving you some fabulous prizes and shout-outs in a future episode. But if people want to get in on that action, go to lastnighters.com/Patreon. The show notes for this one is lastnighters.com/108, and Free Ounce of Kratom is where you can get your Free Ounce of Kratom, ironically enough. Robert, anything else they can do before we get into the Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which is a little bit of bonus content we'll do right after this?
Well, you can tell a friend about the show. You can buy a T-shirt at Trupster.com. I've been getting a couple sales lately. It's been fantastic. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You could share our videos. You could leave a thumbs up. You can do any of those things and more. But the main thing is use your own creativity and ingenuity. If you really think the show is good and worthwhile, tell a friend.
Well said. All right. Well, thank you, John. I hope you can stick around for a little bit longer. And we will say goodnight from last night, everyone. All right, we're going to continue just another minute or two on the Actual Anarchy podcast. John, that was a excellent episode. Thank you so much. I wish that I had written down all the things I wanted to say, but then we'd be talking for another hour. But there is one thing I wanted to bring up, and that is all of these people talking about the lack of standards and wanting to regulate kratom. I wonder how they would compare that to, say, something like vaccines, where we always hear about how the vaccines haven't been tested appropriately or for interactions with each other and things like of this nature. Yet it seems like people blindly just support vaccination no matter what. And there's like the vaccine drug court and the fund that, there's no liability to the manufacturers and all these things. So it's like government's just in there meddling with all of this stuff. And that's what these people asking for regulation are asking for. And it seems kind of ridiculous and a little bit if they're not aware of it, but contradictory,
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I appreciate the libertarian movement, especially the voluntarist sect of the libertarian movement, is that consistency is so important, right? Whether everyone is consistent or not, at least it's something you can call people out on and something that we tend to strive towards. And so that moral consistency is something that you kind of, when you're not being consistent in your position, or ideally in your daily life and the choices that you make, that's how, in my opinion, we create a free society, is that we consistently apply the philosophy of liberty in our daily lives and our choices. But at least when a libertarian or a voluntarist isn't speaking consistently, they have to have that bit of cognitive dissonance to proceed. And I think in other movements and other political philosophies, that's not something that strive towards at all. They are more utilitarian, and they just go along with whatever the authority says. And so I appreciate Larkin Rose's work, because it talks about the authority, right? And so it's not just government authority, but it's what people see as an authority for truth or for what we ought to do. And so if the CDC comes out and says it's okay, or the FDA says it's okay, or a medical doctor, an MD says it's okay, then that is their source of truth. And that's just not the case. And again, libertarians have an extra layer of analysis where we see these other human motivations and why someone would do that, and they're motivated in this way or that way. And it's just a much more thorough analysis that I appreciate about libertarians. And yeah, it is inconsistent, but the CDC says it's recommended, and my doctor said I should do it for my children. So that's the truth.
Well said. Robert, you want to hop in on this before we shut down the Actual Anarchy portion of the show here?
Well, government corrupts everything. And, humans like to take advantage of the division of labor, because, you've got these experts that devote their entire lives to a certain topic. So, of course, you're going to take their opinion, generally speaking, over your own opinion. If you haven't really researched, you don't have the time, you're spending your entire life, doing other things. So you're going to be like, well, I will take this expert's opinion. But like John was just saying, a lot of the times these experts' opinions are influenced by corrupting influences. And yeah, I love that he was saying that, the libertarian generally takes into account these other influencing factors when making their decisions.
Yeah, and good shout out for the Larkin Rose stuff. We're big fans of his. And we did his Candles in the Dark seminar a couple of years ago, helping to talk to statists and all of this. And we've tried to implement some of those things in our lives and also in the show. And we've heard from people that we've helped turn a few people towards libertarianism. So those are the bigger wins, even bigger than the Patreons. So
yeah, I appreciate libertarianism. I think conspiracy theories too, because that's how I got my start in activism, was questioning 9/11 and encouraging people to look all that up, and then all the what's now called the deep state. We used to call the shadow government, and the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, all these puppets that stick around, the puppet string pullers. Yeah, the Bilderbergs. When someone like begins to have a fracture in their reality, it kind of has these trickle down effects. So someone is exposed to libertarianism and they talk about protectionism, or they talk about how money influences this or the other, or when someone learns that 9/11 was an inside job, for example, it just creates a little shred of doubt. And then that shred of doubt can, if cultivated, right, like your show waters that little shred of doubt, and all sorts of people's books and knowledge and videos water that shred of doubt, that seed of doubt, and it springs, and it can have a cascading effect. So before you know it, not only are you questioning the role of government in our lives, or you're putting doubt on the information that the bureaucrats are putting out, but now you're like choosing not to vaccinate your kids because you're skeptical of what the government says, or now you're willing to try something like Kratom for pain because you don't buy what the CDC said about it, or you don't watch the mainstream news because you know that they're funded and they have an agenda. So it's cool that this one political thing, libertarianism, can really start applying to all sorts of other areas of our life. It's just really what it is thinking for yourself and questioning the prevailing opinion. Right? Tom Woods says, we're going to talk about what's not allowed on the 3x5 index card of allowable thought, right? So it's when you start thinking outside of that 3x5 card, there's a whole world of wonder out there.
Indeed, indeed. Well, hey, John, thank you so much. You've been an excellent guest. This is actualanarchy.com/165 for the show notes and more on this one. And we will, of course, have a link to freeounceofkratom.com, as well as your Brave Botanicals. A lot of the other stuff that I mentioned on this show we'll have on the show notes page as well. And we'd love to have you back sometime in the future. Maybe we can just talk about a regular movie or another documentary if you're a documentary guy. And thank our audience. You guys have been great. We appreciate you supporting us for, 3.5 years now, almost 4 years. So we'll just keep on trucking, right, Robert?
That's right, baby. You guys are the best. Thank you all.
All right. And maximum freedom all the time, everyone. Good night.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do, 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 do.